Well, you've undoubtedly heard by now that President Blowhard had said that he'd go blasting into the school, imaginary guns blazing, and tackle the murderer, and is being mocked roundly for it. But turns out that's not what he said, and much more importantly, the question is, what would you do? Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And the question today is, what Donald Trump has said is being made into a case of fools rushing in where angels fear to tread. But I think the better question is, do angels rush in where fools fear to tread? And that really is the heart of the issue.
Wow. Yeah.
What we've known from the shooting in Florida, as well as in too many cases of these other mass shootings, law enforcement officials have basically waited for one reason or another. I'm not accusing them of cowardice. In many cases, it's company policy, or rather a police department policy. Maybe in some cases it is cowardice, but even as far back as Columbine, forces were massing outside, armed forces whose job is to protect the American people while gunshots and screams were going on inside a school. And so the question is a complex one, and one that we're not going to be able to cover too much here, except for this particular aspect of it. So before we tape the show, Steve and I were talking about this, and we mentioned, one of us had mentioned that it might be better if you'd been a little more, thoughtful in terms of how you phrase that, especially knowing what the press is going to do with it. But first of all, let's talk about the actual phrasing, because it's being portrayed as if Trump just said, "I'd go burn in there to the school." What he actually said was this. So this is the direct quote: "You don't know until you're tested." Let me just stop right there. That absolutely mitigates everything that comes after it, as far as I'm concerned. You don't know until you're tested, but I really believe I'd run in there even if I didn't have a weapon. And I think the rest of you in this room would have done that too. And that's not the same thing as what the press is making it out to be, that I'm I'm just going to go in there like Arnold Schwarzenegger and gun the guy down. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because when Donald Trump said that, I knew the trouble he was going to be in, but I think I would have said exactly the same thing. I think I would have said almost precisely exactly the same thing. So, Scott, let's just talk about this idea. We're not going to talk about guns and all the rest of it. We've covered that in many episodes, especially this week. I want to believe that I would be the kind of person that would go in there and do that. I know in my heart that's the direction that I would be drawn. Some people run towards gunfire. Some people run away from it. I know from experience that I would run toward it. But I can't tell you that I would go into that room. I have never had to face that moment of, okay, now it's your life. Are you going to go in the door, yes or no? And I think, like most people who have developed a bit of courage over their lives, the thing that I am most terrified of, the thing that actually scares me the most, is being a coward at the moment when I can't afford to be. Yeah.
And even as you said that, I thought back through my life of several circumstances. I mean, nothing on the order of a shooting with, and I've heard some of the audio of this, the sound of that gunfire. Nothing on the order of that. But my consistent pattern through life, as I think back, has been to move toward rather than away from people in distress, people who needed help in various ways, even dangerous situations. Not that I'm some sort of exemplar of courage or anything like that, but I think I'm driven in many ways by that same gut instinct. How horrible would I feel if I had been nearby and able to render aid in some way and had failed to do so? I mean, that's kind of the driving force. There's this natural compassion within you, I think, that drives you to say, I've got to do something. And I think that President Trump in some ways was just kind of, in an almost boyish manner, expressing the zeitgeist of the vast majority of the culture of basically, I mean, who hasn't had this thought? Who hasn't had this conversation in some cases after every one of these shootings? Half the country hasn't. Yeah. Half the country has not had this conversation. Well, I don't know. I guess I hang out with the wrong folks, or maybe the right folks. But, I think that after Virginia Tech and the shooting that happened back then, what was that? We're going on 10 years from Virginia Tech now. After that, I determined that I did not want to be somebody who was hiding under a desk or trying to jam a desk up against a door or watching while helpless, unarmed people were mowed down. And I took steps at that time to mitigate that possibility. And since then, after taking those steps, as I look back, when I'm in public places, I'm practicing situational awareness. I'm gaming. I am, and I'm not a gamer, but I'm gaming out situations going, okay, I'm in a theater right now. Where are the exits? What would I do if presented with a threat? How would I protect my wife and children? That is kind of something that's just always in your mind, not in a fearful way. It's just part of your normal navigation of society. If I had to face a threat here, what would I do if I was in a theater once that caught fire. So I know what I would do if a theater caught fire because I did it, So it's one of those things that, dare I say it, without offending half the population, it's something men do. Men think about how to protect people. And I'm sure many women think the same way as well. But that's just kind of deep in the species. It is fundamental to the way we are. And so I think for the president, it was probably not the most adroit expression of this, but, President Trump, as you have pointed out, did not get elected through adroit expressions. He gets elected by kind of blurting out what everybody's thinking.
Well, he's blurting out what half the country's thinking, and the other half, the part that controls the culture that we swim in, Steve, has savaged him as just being an enormous blowhard who's simply lying through his teeth in order to make himself look braver than he is. And the reason that the press is treating him that way is because the idea of running into that school not only never entered their minds, but they find it impossible to believe that it could have entered the minds of other people. They simply cannot comprehend it. The progressive elite, not just the progressive elite, there is in fact, I think actually, this kind of thing determines whether you're a conservative or a liberal in modern America. But the people who are so roundly criticizing Trump are criticizing him in a truthful way on a certain level, because they simply cannot imagine that what he said could have been anything other than bluster. But for those people who do think about these things, and people who are armed, and people who have situational awareness, and people who do worry, in fact, who are mortified about whether or not they're going to find the courage they need when they need to find it, and know that they won't know until they get there, and hope that they never do get there, for those people, this didn't sound ridiculous at all. And all of Europe basically has become one nation of cowards, and it seems like half of us, one continent of cowards, and it seems like half of us are well on our way here too, where it's not a question of, no, you're a hero. It's a question of the entire idea of heroism is so foreign, it's so far away, that they just can't think of anything that could justify it. It must just be simple ignorance and bluster and vulgarity.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Europe. This may seem a little off topic, but I'm going to weave it back into your question, I promise. But you remember a couple, 3 years ago, the massacre, the Islamic terror massacre at the Paris theater. I can't remember how many people were killed in that thing, 70, 80, 90, 100 more. I can't remember. I tried not to think about it too much. But the French counter-terror forces were outside the theater waiting for the go order. And somebody inside the theater is texting or calling outside the theater, please storm the building now. We're being slaughtered. They didn't care if innocents got killed, and maybe if they were one of the innocents, because these terrorists were just going from person to person and executing them. So it was, please storm the building. And that's 2-3 years ago now. And that's why it mystifies me. Well, the Broward County sheriffs stood outside waiting for reinforcements. There were 4 deputies. They had paramedics. All these people standing around sucking their thumbs while 17 people were executed inside that school building. And this takes me back to procedures that police departments have been developing since Columbine, which is almost 20 years ago, 1999. I'll never forget this. Back then, well, this is awful. I was visiting a friend of mine in the hospital when the news came in. He had the TV on all the time because you're sitting there getting chemotherapy, dying of leukemia. You got to have the TV on, right? And the news starts coming in from Columbine. And I didn't really have my wits about me that day because I'm watching my friend take chemo. But when the shock wore off, I started to think, oh my God, there are going to be copycats. This crime isn't just terrible. This is going to set the stage for more and more terrible crimes. And sure enough, it has. It's also caused police departments and sheriff's departments around the world to change their training and doctrine from wait outside until you've got all the possible reinforcements and then go in to a much more proactive stance, which makes Broward a real mystery. That said, I did some real thinking after Columbine, 'cause that's just 40 minutes from my house. And let me show you something. I've got to make sure I've got the address covered here, but that's my concealed carry license. And I've made it a point. If I'm out and about, there is probably something small and pocketable on my person, and if I'm at home or off my person, while I'm out and about, say in the car, there might be something of a much heavier caliber that I can get to in a hurry if need be. So, would I be the guy that storms into the building, into the room to face the guy with a rifle? I don't know. I've never heard the sound of gunfire that was directed at me or at anything other than a paper target down at the range. But I can tell you that I've thought long and hard about it, and I prepared for it as best I can. And I don't know what more a citizen should do, but I know a citizen, not a serf, should at least do that much.
Yeah. Nobody I know who understands what courage is has ever once said, "Oh, that I would definitely be courageous in that situation." Because the realization of what actual physical courage is, it's such a, I was going to say mysterious, but it's actually such a divine thing. It appears, and you can't, I don't know that you can actually summon it. In all the stories I've ever read about it, it simply appears. And for people who think about these things, as most conservatives do, we can't say that it's going to appear. We just pray that it will appear. We pray that we'll be worthy of the courage to appear when we need it. And we're terrified that it won't. But at the very least, on some level, what we are doing when we think about things like this is we are training ourselves. We are preparing ourselves for the eventuality. And the more we think about it, my personal opinion, the more we think about it, the more likely we are to do the right thing, to be able to function. That's what training is. When I was learning how to fly, I learned in gliders, and every single time I was told, expect that rope to break. In other words, don't expect things to go well, expect them to go badly, and imagine your happiness and your surprise when the engine doesn't fail on this takeoff, but you've always got a plan. You've always got a plan. Now, I think I would have said the exact same thing as Donald Trump said, because I felt that. That's how I felt. I felt like if I was there, I would have run in. Maybe I wouldn't. I don't know. I do know this. If somebody is walking around a school shooting at innocent people, and you simply smash a window and start firing some rounds into the ceiling, that's going to get that person's attention. You know, you don't have to, we've seen in many of these cases, you don't actually have to hit the guy from 100 yards away. You just have to put rounds in his general direction. He's no longer interested in people who are crawling away and shooting them in the back of the head. Now you can hide behind a wall, just fire some rounds in his direction, and at the very least take his attention away from the murder and so on. So all of this stuff goes into my mind, and all of these calculations go on, and I just don't know. I know that when I had 3 engine failures in single-engine airplanes, they've been non-events because I expect them to happen. And other pilots who don't expect them to happen don't perform as well as I did. That encourages me, but I still don't know. But here's what I do know. Here's what I absolutely know. I know that liberals and progressives don't fall into vapors and fits and faint dead away when they walk into a bank and see an armed guard there, because the idea that a guy with a gun is in a bank because there's valuable things in the bank is something that even progressives can understand. So, why is it that we are able to accept that, but not the idea that we have to have somebody able to defend our children there. And this brings me to the main point of this entire episode. Well, people like us who try to do the right thing, who think about doing the right thing. I put Donald Trump in this category, I genuinely do. People who really do believe that they would have made an effort to go in there. Well, as Donald Trump said, you don't know until you're tested. There are, in fact, in America right now, an incredibly valuable asset that has a shelf life. And that is the hundreds of thousands of returning veterans who don't have to ask themselves what they will do when they're tested because they've already been tested. They already know that they're going to make the grade. They already know. These people exist in our society now, and many of them are simply lost souls, and many of them are so burdened by what they've had to do for this country and no purpose in their lives at all, that they're doing to themselves what the enemy never could do to them. To have this many people in this country who have exhibited actual physical courage and gone rushing in to gunfire to save a little girl on the street who's not their person, not an American, not anything. They simply couldn't stand the thought of a little girl in the crossfire, so they risked the only life they have to go out there and save that person. We need to get these people involved in protecting our kids, and we need to get these people involved in training the people who protect our kids. Because that's what training is. And the harder you train, the more likely you are to be successful. And when you're training well enough, like airline pilots and like our military, when you train well enough, actual combat or actual emergencies are kind of a relief. They're not nearly so bad. We need to start taking this seriously. And I think this is a lot more important than having emojis removed from iPhones if we're going to be serious about this issue. Thank you very much for joining us. This whole show is made possible by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. We'd love to have you be one of them if you care to be. I'm Bill Whittle with Steve Green and Scott Ott. We'll see you next week on Right Angle.